I'd like to welcome you all to the fifth annual Black Hat briefings held here in Las Vegas. This is the second year we've been back at Caesar's Palace. You notice the place we were at last year got blown up. This is where we'll be for the next couple of years. It's much nicer and larger, I think. We have a lot more speaking space, so we don't feel as crowded. It's been a busy year since I saw everybody last. I think some kind of bubble burst somewhere and made our life a little bit more interesting. But this is going to be the largest Black Hat ever as far as new material and speeches and presentations. And you can tell that because you're here an hour earlier. Normally I start at 9, but to fit everybody in I had to start an hour earlier. Not my preference, but it's sort of out of necessity. Let's see, it's hopefully going to be the most technical Black Hat ever. I'm going to try to, each year and at each show, increase the technical content until I achieve my fantasy goal of alienating about 20% of you in each room. So, I figure if 20% of you kind of shake your head and go, what the heck just happened? I've achieved my goal, and it might drive some of you to go out and learn more. It's no fun when you understand everything that's being said. So I'm doing this intentionally. Let me see, we're going to continue to expand the Black Hat Briefings name. We're going to be holding our Win 2K show, next one, in New Orleans right before Mardi Gras. And we're doing a show in Amsterdam that's going to have more training before it. And we're going to continue in Asia, probably in Hong Kong and Singapore. And we're contemplating maybe a show in South America. We've also launched Black Hat Consulting. And we're going to do more trainings in between shows, initially out of Seattle. So you can get training in the near future, not just at our shows, but also in between shows. Let me see, the network is up. It's an 802.11b network, and we've got coverage mostly on all the floors. And if the door's open, you can get it in here as well. 10.0.0.2 is the message board and schedule update site. I've posted some signs around. I know some people initially started using it as a resume repository. But you can do with it whatever you want. Just don't insult anybody or start flame wars. For people who don't have a wireless connection, there's going to be a hub by the secure computing booth and power strip and such. So if you need to plug in your laptop, there's I think a 25-port hub there. Remember, it's a hub and not a switch, and you probably want to try to encrypt everything you can. I don't know how many people are running EtherPeek and EtherSpoof and EtherSniff and let's see, final notes. Like a movie theater, I ask everybody to please turn off cell phones. Yes. And at the there's a 6 p.m. gala reception tonight, and at that reception, Jim Bamford, the keynote speaker, will be doing a book signing. Walden Books will be here to sell books if you don't already own it. If you're interested, then he can do a book signing with them. We've got a lot of questions about that. And then also during the gala reception, Win Schwartau will be trying out, beta testing, his new ethical survivor game. First time he's ever tried it. So he's going to test it against you guys. I think that'll be in this room while the reception's out there. Let me see, O'Reilly was kind enough to provide us with shirts and some signed books of Database Nation that hopefully each speaker will be giving away as a prize to somebody in the audience during their session for best question asked or best insight or whatever the speaker comes up with. We're going to try to incentivize the audience to participate more, going to bribe you. So I'd like to welcome you all to Black Hat, and I'm going to introduce the first speaker if Jim is around. You saw him at the Win 2K show, if you showed up. He spoke about his history of creating his first fantastic book about the NSA, The Puzzle Palace. But his Body of Secrets book was still not published yet, so he couldn't really talk about the specifics in that book. Instead, he told fantastic stories about how Ronald Reagan passed a couple of executive orders to prevent him from doing continued research in certain areas. So in this book, he's come around, he's found ways around those presidential decision directives and has created this new book. And I'm sure soon there'll be new laws preventing his research methods to prevent him from writing a third book. But with that said, I'd like to introduce Jim Bamford. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me here. As Jeff said, I just did a new book. It's called Body of Secrets, The Anatomy of the Ultrasecret National Security Agency. What it does, it takes a look at NSA from through the Cold War. My first book, The Puzzle Palace, started back with World War I and brought it forward. And this book here basically looks at NSA during the Cold War, and especially since the period of time since The Puzzle Palace came out. Just to give you a little background, when I began writing, I graduated from law school and didn't want to practice law. I wanted to get into writing. And I was looking around for a topic to write on. There have been scores of books on the CIA. And I wanted to write on the intelligence community. There had never been any book on NSA. And after I started looking into it, I realized why. I mean, it was extremely hard to get any information on the agency. There had never been any other books written before that. And NSA, as many of you probably know, is very shy. They don't like to come out very often. Last night, if any of you stayed up, Nightline did a piece on my book, and it was supposed to. We were going to have this piece come out a couple months ago, but it took all this time to finally get NSA to agree to appear on camera. When I began work on the Puzzle Palace, I didn't really even have an idea how secret NSA was, and I started to get that idea, especially after the book came out. I mean, not only among average people, but even among people in government. When my book came out, I had to do a book tour, and one of the people on the book tour was that I had to share a TV show with was Senator Bill Bradley from New Jersey. He was going to be on the show to talk about the economy, and I was going to be on there to talk about my book. So we shared this taxi ride over to the studio, and he said, "What's your book about?" And I said, "It's about NSA, the National Security Agency." And he said, "What's that?" So I ended up briefing this Senator Rhodes Scholar on the way in the taxi on the way to the studio. Then when we got on the air, the first question the host asked me was, "How secret is NSA?" And I just couldn't resist it, and I said, even Senator Bradley said he'd never heard of it. And we were supposed to take the same taxi back, but he decided to leave without me. And the next day, his aide called me up and said, "That was a pretty below-the-belt hit you did on the senator last night." And I said, "I just was telling the truth. I mean, he's supposed to know what the government's all about." And I said, if I wanted to hit him below the belt, I said I would have probably said he probably confused it with the NBA. So obviously, I've never heard from Senator Bradley again. Then when the book came out, again, doing this book tour, when you're giving talks different places, you sort of sneak into these bookstores and make sure your book is in there. And I went in and a number of bookstores, and I'd look for it. It wouldn't be in there. So I'd go up and say, "Do you have the Puzzle Palace?" And the clerk would say, "Well, yeah, we've got 5 copies or whatever." And I'd say, "I don't see it." And they said, "Well, it's right back there in the puzzle section." So that's why I changed the name of the new book here. And even the Book of the Month Club, every author wants to get on the Book of the Month Club, and they put your little jacket on the back of the New York Times Book Review with all these other famous books and all that. And so I looked at the back page of the New York Times Book Review, and there it was, my little jacket. But it said, "The Puzzle Palace, a report on NASA, America's most secret agency." And the ad agency that put it in thought I had made a mistake on my book because they'd never heard of NSA, and they voluntarily changed it. So for a couple weeks until it was changed back, I think at least I probably got a few sales to astronauts who probably never would have bought it beforehand. What Jeff asked me to talk to you about basically is researching NSA, how I went about getting some of the information. I don't know how many people know much about NSA. I'll give a little background on what NSA is for those who don't know too much about it. First of all, it's the largest intelligence agency in the world, about twice or even larger than that, twice larger than the CIA. It specializes in signals intelligence, eavesdropping. It's the world's biggest ear. It eavesdrops on communications all over the world. A lot of those communications, as you assume, are encrypted. So the second major responsibility is breaking codes, and the third responsibility is making the U.S. encryption system. One of the big controversies now involving NSA is Echelon. Echelon is basically it's a code word for this system that links NSA and the NSA and the other major English-speaking countries of the world together to form a major worldwide eavesdropping organization. It's known as the UK-USA agreement, and after World War II, the United States, Great Britain, the Australians, the Canadians, and the New Zealanders all got together to form this very secret organization to collaborate all their eavesdropping and code-breaking activities together, so that Australia would, because of location, could eavesdrop better on Southeast Asia, and the UK could eavesdrop better on Europe and so forth, and they all share it together. And that's gotten the Europeans very worried now that the Europeans have come together in the European Union. They're very worried because they're afraid that NSA and all these other countries are spying on their economic information and giving it to U.S. competitors. So that's one of the major controversies involving NSA right now. Now, in terms of doing work on and one other thing, just to bring NSA back into the news, there was that plane that went down on Hainan Island, that EP-3E that had the mishap in the air with the Chinese fighter and went down on Hainan Island. Again, that's NSA. NSA, even though you don't hear about it every day, it has planes out flying along coast and eavesdropping on communication. So it plays a major role around the world, even though you don't hear about it every day. Now, in terms of getting information on NSA, it was a real challenge. If you were going to do a book on the CIA, there's a lot to start with. You've got all these other books. You read the books. You find out who talked to these other authors. You read articles, who's talked to the Washington Post, and you at least start with those people. And then you ask them to recommend somebody else to talk to you and so forth. There wasn't such a thing with NSA. There was virtually no articles. There were no books. So I had to be creative in almost everything I did in terms of trying to get information. And to a large degree, there's a lot of comparisons between hacking and what I do. I mean, hackers try to get forbidden information electronically, and I try to get forbidden information through bureaucratic methods, going through documents or finding people. But to a large degree, I mean, the principle is the same. The information is very hidden, and you've got to find creative ways to go out and get that information. So finding people was a very difficult problem. One of the things that, one of my biggest successes in finding people was there was NSA has a retirement society called the Phoenix Society, and I found one person that I met in looking for people. I found one person that had this booklet, and it contained all the former, or many of the former NSA employees. It was a retirement association, so that was a major advantage. I found that book, and it gave me locations and names and so forth, so that was a big help in terms of getting locations of people. In terms of documents, though, documents were very, very hard because NSA, unlike almost any other agencies, immune from the Freedom of Information Act. It has a thing called Public Law 8636, subsection 6, which I know by heart because I submitted so many FOIA requests to NSA and get the same letter back saying, under Public Law 8636, subsection 6, we don't have to give you this information. And what that law says basically is that Congress shall create no law requiring NSA to divulge any information about its organization, function, structure, personnel, salary, or any information basically, other than its name. So that was pretty tough. I mean, what am I going to do? I've got this thing that makes NSA immune from the Free Information Act. Well, one of the things I did was in searching through what are known as manuscript collections. These are where people leave their papers to someplace else. In other words, if I die, I'm going to leave all my papers maybe to the university I went to or something. Well, one of the founders of NSA was William F. Friedman, and he left all his papers to this place called the George C. Marshall Research Foundation. And in going through his papers, I came across the NSA newsletter. The NSA newsletter was a wealth of information. It's published every month. It talks about internal activities. It doesn't go, it's unclassified, so it doesn't go into, you know, what the latest eavesdropping system is. But it talks a lot about what's happening in NSA, who the people are, and what's going on. So I really wanted to get a copy of that, and I submitted an FOI request to NSA, and they said, under Public ID 636, you can't have it. But in reading carefully, the newsletter that I did get was in William F. Friedman's file at the George C. Marshall Library. It was when he retired, he kept his newsletter. And in that newsletter it said, the contents of this newsletter must be kept within the small circle of NSA employees and their families. And one of the few advantages of having gone to law school is it sort of struck a bell when I read it. The last three words, anyway. It said, and their families. Because what that did was, by putting those last three words in there, they've opened that newsletter up to a group of people outside of the agency. They've opened it up to people who don't necessarily have security clearances, to people whose only connection is consanguinity to somebody that works there. There happened to be a relative of some sort. So I argued to NSA that, look, if you've opened these newsletters up to a category of people outside of NSA employees, then you've got to open it up to me. I'm as good as somebody just because they're a relative or something. In fact, I'm better because I'm coming in asking for these documents under a congressional act. Well, they had never heard that argument before, and it sort of floored them. And within a week, I got a call to come down and meet with the general counsel of NSA. And they were very worried, and I said that, look, if we go to court, I'm certainly going to win on this argument, and not only am I going to win, you're probably going to lose Public ID 636 because you've waived it for the last 25 years and giving these newsletters out. So the general counsel asked for another meeting, and I went down there, and this time I had a list of what I wanted to trade. I was sort of horse trading. If you drop your lawsuit, or I hadn't filed a lawsuit, but if you agree not to sue us, basically, and go to court over this FOI request, we'll give you something. So I asked for a few things. I had a list. I wanted a tour of the agency. I wanted the entire internal structure. I wanted interviews with senior officials. I had a whole list of all these things I wanted. I figured maybe I'll get one of them. After I went in there, and it was Valentine's Day of all things, they said, okay, if you drop it, we'll give you everything you asked for. So they did. They gave me the tour, the interviews, the internal structure with the names and the titles and everything. It was amazing. What I didn't tell them was, and what I had to give up to get that was not request the names of people above a certain level or below a certain level. In other words, I would get the whole newsletter, except they would delete the names of people below a certain rank. And I really didn't care about that anyway. So I got virtually the entire, everything I asked for. And it was a wealth of information. If you take that information, the information in the newsletter for 25 years, from 1952 until about the time that I got the newsletters, and you put it all together, you really get a good picture of what's going on inside NSA. Well, that was how I got a lot of that information, a lot of the internal information. And again, it was forcing NSA to give this to me, obviously very reluctantly, but they wanted to avoid court, and they ended up giving it to me. One of the other ways I had to be somewhat unique in getting information was I used these manuscript collections, as I mentioned. most people don't realize that there's a lot of information out there in university archives and other places where people, like I said, have left their papers. And when I went to the George C. Marshall Research Library, one of the things that really frustrated me was going through William F. Friedman's papers, because he had left all his papers there in order to get him away from NSA. He was one of the founders of NSA, and he was one of the founders of American cryptology. But he had a big falling out with NSA at the end of his career in the late 50s, because NSA, ever paranoid, I mean, they're extremely paranoid about information getting out. They even suspected Friedman may be secretly stealing secrets, so they actually raided his house one time, which didn't make Friedman very happy. So after that, instead of leaving his papers to NSA, he tried to get him away from NSA, and he left them to this George C. Marshall Research Library. Well, when I went down there and started going through his papers, and I was only the second person to go through it, I found all these withdrawal slips from NSA saying this document has been withdrawn by the National Security Agency. This document's been withdrawn. So I started talking to the archivist down there, and again, this is not a government organization. This is a private library. I think, well, you know, what's the idea here? Friedman put his papers down here to get him away from NSA. And these were personal letters that were pulled out. These weren't government documents. And they're personal letters after he had retired. And so I basically convinced the archivist that, look, your job is not to serve NSA. These things have never been classified. Your job is to serve William F. Friedman. So he agreed, and he opened up all those papers to me. So I had access to all these papers that NSA had pulled out, and NSA had no idea about it. So I got a lot of that material. And then while I was there, the archivist said, as long as you're here, do you want to see the George C. Marshall, the Marshall Carter papers? Marshall Carter was a former director of NSA. And I said, you mean he left his papers here too? And he said, yeah, and nobody knew that. NSA didn't even know that he left his papers there. So I thought I was in a dream there for a while. So I had access to all these papers, and Marshall Carter had taken all his office papers. They were all unclassified, but he took them, all the unclassified papers, out with him. He kept them in his basement, and then when he became president of the George C. Marshall Foundation, he donated them all to this library. And so I went through there, and there was an amazing amount of documents in there. Among them were personal letters from the director of the GCHQ, which is the British equivalent of NSA, to Marshall Carter. And these were handwritten, and there were never any classification on them, because the director of GCHQ, obviously never assumed that the letters are going to be put in a public library or anything. So they happened to be in there, and I got copies of these letters, and they talked all about the cooperation and so forth. And very, very valuable. When the book came out, NSA suddenly realized that I'd gotten access to all this information. So NSA, first thing they did was they sent a bunch of people down to the library and ordered the librarian to put all that stuff back in the vault. And then they went out to Marshall Carter. He was in retirement out in Colorado, and they ordered him to close his collection, otherwise go to jail, basically. So he shut his collection down immediately. So all those documents I quote from in the Puzzle Palace, or a lot of them that came from this place, are no longer available. As a result of the actions, the American Civil Liberties Union, the American Historical Association, the American Library Association, a number of other groups all sued NSA, saying you can't go into a private library and start pulling things off a shelf in order and kept secret. And the end result of the suit was a sort of a partial victory for either side. And some of those documents did get put back on, but a lot of them did not. And Carter's papers have never seen the light of day again. One of the most serious problems I had in terms of documents, again, this was with the Freedom of Information Act, was trying to get information on a very secret investigation that had taken place into NSA. The Justice Department in the mid-'70s conducted an extremely secret investigation of NSA's eavesdropping capabilities, and the fact that they were probably breaking the law by eavesdropping illegally on American citizens. They conducted this internal investigation, and they even read Miranda rights to senior members of the NSA. Eventually, they decided not to do the investigation because too many secrets would be revealed, even though they did find probable cause that crimes were committed. All that was very secret, though, and I submitted an FOI request to the Justice Department for any documents related to that investigation. And it took about 9 months, but then the Justice Department, I was extremely amazed. It was sort of like throwing you're fishing, you just sort of throw a hook into the water and just wonder what's going to happen. And they actually released to me a lot of those documents. They had redacted some material. And again, it was amazing to me, but NSA didn't know that. The Justice Department did it without ever asking NSA's permission or anything. And they later said that it was on the principle that, if you had requested Al Capone's or, John Gotti's criminal file, they wouldn't go and ask John Gotti's permission before they would release it to me. It had to do with what the FOIA says. So when NSA found out, they demanded the Attorney General try to get the documents back from me. But this was the same Attorney General, Civiletti, who had released them to me, so he didn't even pay no attention to NSA's letter. Well, then Ronald Reagan came into office, and much more conservative attitude, and the Attorney General was William French Smith, and this time Bobby Ray Inman, who was the director, went to William French Smith and said, Bamford's got all these documents, we've got to get them back, his book's going to come out, and so forth. And so William French Smith agreed to go along with it, and I got this phone call from the Justice Department saying they'd like to have a meeting with me. And at that point, I mean, it's not every day you get a call from the Justice Department wanting to meet you in Washington to discuss something. So I got a lawyer in Washington, one of the best national security lawyers, and a guy named Mark Lynch. And we had the meeting, and they explained that all these documents had been released to me by accident, and that they wanted them all back. So I wasn't really, I didn't want to give any answers right then and there. I just said, well, I'll have to think about it and so forth. And then we had another meeting, and this one was going to be up in Boston where my publisher was and where I was living. And this time, senior officials from NSA came up and senior Justice Department lawyers came up. And I was just going to tell them, no, I'm not going to give them back. It's bad precedent. You can't have one administration give you documents and another administration try to take them away. It's really bad precedent. But they got very agitated, and they started saying, how many copies have you made, who have you given documents to, and so forth. And I said, well, it's not on the agenda today. You're just going to ask me whether I was going to give them back, and I was going to say no. So you got to call up my lawyer, Mark Lynch, and ask him these questions. And so I could hear them on my side of the phone. I'm hearing the NSA guy, or the Justice Department guy, talking to my lawyer. He starts bringing up the espionage statute and everything else. So Mark Lynch says, why don't you put the phone back on its side and wait outside and let me talk to Bamford, wait outside the conference room. So I got on the phone, and Mark Lynch said, they're getting way over your head. They could have I don't know what's in their pocket. They could have a subpoena or a summons or a warrant for your arrest or whatever. And because there is a section in the espionage statute that says if you incidentally or accidentally come into possession of classified documents and refuse to give them back to their proper custodian, you could be charged under the Act, which is like 10 or 20 years in jail. So it was fairly serious. So Mark Lynch said, my suggestion is put the phone back down on its side, go out, tell them I want to talk to them again, and as they're going into the room, you just disappear. So I did. I just left. I actually went into my editor's office and waited there until they left, and they had to sort of find their way out of the conference room because I had asked the publisher not to have anything to do with this. I would meet with them alone. And they found their way back to Washington, and then they started sending me letters saying, you are currently in possession of classified documents, and we demand their return. And we kept sending a letter back saying, under the executive order on secrecy, it says once a document's been declassified, it can't be reclassified. I mean, it's fairly simple. You don't need a law degree to sort of understand that. And they continue to send letters back saying, besides that, or forget that. We want the documents back. And we just keep sending the same letter. Well, then President Reagan changed the executive order on secret to say once the document's been declassified, it can be reclassified. But they couldn't apply it in my case because it would have been ex post facto. In other words, you can't create a law to punish somebody who's done something beforehand. Then after the book came out again, they tried to prosecute me a second time, or they threatened to prosecute me a second time, and because of all the information in the book. But again, the Justice Department took a look at it, looked at my back notes, about 100 pages worth of back notes, showing where I got all the information, and there was no grounds to bring any charges. I did it all legally. So after that, they sort of went away, and that was the end of it. And after that, then I went and did a lot of other things in journalism. I wrote for magazines, wrote pieces for the New York Times Magazine and other places. And then ABC hired me to be the investigative producer for World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, and I did that for about 10 years. And then the Monica Lewinsky story came along, and I thought it was time to go back into writing again. I really couldn't handle it. And so that's when my publisher had been after me to do a new book on NSA, and so I decided to go back and do a new book. And on this new book, Body of Secrets, again, I left ABC in April, I think it was, of 1998, and then I approached NSA and I said, look, I'm going to do another book on NSA, sequel. Can I have some help this time, you know? Cold War is over. It's been 20 years since my last book or so. And again, I got this hard, stonewall treatment again. Oh, we can't give you interviews, we're not going to give you a tour, we're not going to do anything. You know, too bad. So I said, okay, well, that was the attitude last time. It didn't stop me from doing a book. I'm going to go ahead and do the book again. And then about a year, then that director left, and a new director came in, General Hayden, Michael Hayden came in, and then I approached him, and again, I got sort of the same treatment. And then about 6 months later, I'm still working, working in the middle of the book at this point, and I got this call from the director of protocol at NSA, a person I never heard of before, and she said, the director was wondering whether you and your wife would like to have dinner with him at his house. So all of a sudden, everything changed, and the director sort of saw the benefit in cooperating, and I had, 700 pages to fill, and I was going to fill it with whatever information I got, and NSA was not going to have a voice in the book if NSA didn't cooperate. So I agreed to, we sort of talked about ways that we could be, NSA could be somewhat helpful. Originally they wanted, NSA wanted some kind of a deal, like a quid pro quo. If we help you, we want to have an opportunity to look at the book or check it over or whatever, and I just wouldn't allow any of that. So I said, if there's going to be any help, it's got to be a one-way street. And so they eventually agreed, and the director gave me a number of interviews, and gave me, I got tours all through the agency again, and I was able to see, how NSA had changed over the years, and I interviewed a lot of senior current officials over there, the newsletters were easy to get now, but after the last time, after the Puzzle Palace, they watered them down, so they weren't very useful. So this time I had to come up with some new idea, using the Freedom of Information Act. And so I had heard that NSA did these oral histories. And one problem I had is I couldn't get any of these former directors to talk to me, or deputy directors. But I'd heard NSA had done these oral histories, and so I submitted a request, FOI request, for all NSA's oral histories. And it was amazing because they had tons of them, and they had oral histories from all the former directors and deputy directors. The only problem was they were extremely highly classified, and it would have taken me forever to battle for those. So I just requested all the unclassified paragraphs. And there are a fair amount of those. There was maybe 20% in each of those 100 pages. So when I was, and this took an awful lot of fighting and battling with NSA to get this information, but it was extremely useful, gave me a great insight into what was going on. Because if you read those oral histories, they had no idea any of that information would ever be made public. It was very funny when a lot of times a director or deputy director, they sit down with this NSA historian in their office at NSA, and they would, the first question is, well, this is going to be kept very secret, isn't it? And the historian would say, there's no way this will ever get out of here. I mean, this, and so there was a lot of gossip in these things, not only a lot of information on operations, which they were able to keep from me, but when they were talking about why they picked this deputy director or why they didn't like this head of operations, that all had to be in there because it wasn't classified. So it was a wealth of information. Using the FOI request, I got a lot of other documents. NSA has a lot of internal publications, and again, using that same philosophy of just asking for the unclassified portions. I was able to expedite it, and I was able to get a great deal of information. And a lot of times, if you get this paragraph, and this one's secret, and this one I got, and this one's secret, you could read it, and you could sort of read between the lines a lot of times and sort of figure it out. One other factor that I've got to mention here, and then I'll take questions, is the issue of luck. I mean, luck is always very important in this, in doing these type of things, and a lot of it is luck, depending on how hard you're working at it. I mean, you really got to work hard at this, and then luck sort of comes along. A couple of lucky things that happened this time was. I requested a lot of these tapes, these videotapes of like these history conferences NSA has had, and that was hard to get, but I got these tapes. And one of the things and they were all unclassified, and it was sort of open to the public, some of these history conferences. But one of the things I always do when I get a tape is I play it right to the end, these videotapes. And lo and behold, they didn't erase one of those videotapes. So they had this internal conference, or this internal discussion at the end that was never supposed to have been on the tape in the first place. And it was a wealth of information. I got a lot of good information. I don't know what the classification would have been, but when it was given to me, it was unclassified. So. Yeah, that's sort of an idea of how I got some of the information, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has any here. Yes, sir. I'll repeat these questions because you probably can't hear them all. The question was, what's the incentive for NSA, or why did they do that? Just classify paragraph by paragraph instead of classifying the whole document or the whole page or whatever. And the reason is that there's a regulation that says they have to do that because each paragraph may be a different classification. One may be unclassified, one may be secret, and a lot of it has to do with the Freedom of Information Act request, and they've got to know what the classification of each of these paragraphs are. I mean, so they do it, and before each paragraph, you'll see a little parentheses, and it'll have like a U or a TS or a TS/C, top secret code word or whatever. And that's why they do it. There's a regulation that says they have to do it. So anytime you get, almost any time I've seen classified documents, they do it paragraph by paragraph. Any other questions here? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, were those ever what? Oh, you mean money on the book or? Yeah. Oh, yes. Well, yeah, the question had to do with the benefit profit motive for doing books pretty much, and whether I made any money on doing this. Actually, doing the Puzzle Palace, I had just gotten out of law school. I had never written a thing in my life, and when I first went to this publisher, they thought I was talking about a novel since they had never heard of the National Security Agency. And so they gave me an advance of, they agreed to do the book, actually the first publisher I went to, which was kind of amazing. But the advance was $7,500, and I ended up spending 3 years on it. So it was a very risky proposition because it could have not sold any. Eventually it became a bestseller, and this new book has become a bestseller. So I did make money on it, but it's a risky venture anytime you go into these things. Yes, sir. The question is, do my books make NSA's job more difficult? I'm sure it does. But, this is America. This is a country where people are allowed to write on different things. If this was Russia, they would have just, Russia in the old days of the, Communist Party and all that, they could have easily just had me arrested and put me away for life or whatever. But the whole difference is that the whole thing is this is a different system. So yeah, I mean, what I do makes NSA more difficult, but I'm not doing it for the benefit of NSA. I'm doing it for the benefit of the public out there. And the follow-on question is always, am I giving secrets away to help the other side? The answer is no. The information I get comes from NSA, almost all of it. I have to, beg and plead and harass them in order to get the information, but most of it comes from them in the first place. The Russians don't get their information from me or from other journalists. I've been writing on intelligence and doing television pieces on intelligence issues for 25 years. And I've followed the spy cases very closely. They get their information from spies. They get it from the people who are turned traitor for the agencies. One of the people I happen to know, when I was in Washington, again, I was the investigative producer for World News Tonight, Peter Jennings. So I had to do a lot of interesting stories involving espionage and scandal and all that. So I'd meet a lot of people. One of the people I happened to meet in doing this work was a guy at the FBI named Bob Hansen. And we became very good friends. He was at my wedding even. And he was really the perfect spy, at least at the time, because he was extremely conservative. He was always trying to get me to do stories on Russian infiltration into the United States, and always trying to get me to go to church. I mean, it was kind of amazing. And then all of a sudden, last February, I start reading the New York Times and I see a headline, major spy arrest, and I saw Bob Hansen's name there. In the corner of my eye, I saw his name. I thought, well, that's great. He made a big spy arrest. Until I read it a little more closely. It wasn't he that was making the arrest. So that's where the Russians get a lot of their information. If you read the indictment of Bob Hansen, for example, most of the counts were not dealing with the FBI. He wasn't really that much of a damage to the FBI. His major damage was to the NSA. Most of the information he gave away dealt with the NSA, including the tunnel under the embassy and how the NSA broke codes. And the bottom line of that is that the intelligence community has got a real problem on getting too much information to too many people in the loop, because they shouldn't have had access to that information. Yes, sir. Yes, the question has to do with whether NSA is trying to build up their, sort of. It's what a lot of agencies are doing. They're looks like these agencies might not be so useful anymore after the Cold War, so they're trying to make up reasons for them to stay in existence. And to a large degree, that's true with NSA and other agencies. They're focusing now the Cold War is over, they're focusing on terrorism and all these other problems, and there's a question as to whether that's really valid or not. I mean, I think NSA is very, very useful and very helpful, and we should keep it up. But the question is whether the money we spend for NSA could be more usefully spent elsewhere, and that's one of the biggest problems for NSA now. I think I got a couple more minutes, and I'll just take one more question, and that'll be it. Yes, sir. Oh, the question was, how's my file with the government? Well, after I did the Puzzle Palace, I submitted an FOI request for my file at NSA. And at first they tried to hide it from me because they, instead of putting it under my name, which is what they're supposed to do and legally obligated to do, they put it under a code name called Esquire, because I had a law degree, I guess. So they said first there were no documents in my file. And then I found that a document with that word on it, Esquire, and I said, well, give me the Esquire file then. And all of a sudden I got a huge drawer full of documents. And they had every TV show I'd ever been on, every radio show, transcripts of it all. It was a great clipping service because they had every newspaper article, and it was really interesting trying to see how they're. It was like seeing the other person's cards as they were playing poker. I knew what my moves were, but now I got to see what their counter moves were and all that. So it was very interesting, and I may do it again this time. I'm not sure. So anyway, thanks very much. I really appreciate your coming, and hope to see you again. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go into general breakouts in about 10 or 15 minutes. And so all the way at the end of this hallway is the deep knowledge section, and behind you is the technical, and behind that is the more technical. The tools of the trade and the white hat tracks are going to be almost directly below us. Thank you.